So when we turn to the specific issue of Israel's presence in the Palestinian territory, there are three issues of law that are virtually uncontested by international lawyers and the international community, except for the Israeli government and now the American State Department. First, Israel is the occupying power in the Palestinian territory, which consists of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Therefore, the strict rules of the laws of occupation apply, which are particularly found in the Fourth Geneva Convention. Second, the Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, of which there are more than 240, with more than 650,000 settlers living in them, are profoundly illegal under international law. And third, Israel's prior annexation of East Jerusalem in 1980 and the Syrian Golan Heights in 1981 are profoundly illegal, and so would any further annexation of the West Bank that is due to occur according to the timetable laid out in the Trump plan and the coalition agreement after the 1st of July. So turning now to the settlements, there are 3 points I want to make with respect to their legality and their impact. First, the Israeli settlements violate the Fourth Geneva Convention's prohibition against civilian settlements, and they are a presumptive war crime under the 1998 Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court. The UN Security Council has said on at least 6 occasions that Israeli settlements breach international law. In its most recent resolution on this issue, which is in December 2016, the Security Council said that the settlements constitute, and I'm quoting, a flagrant violation under international law, unquote. The Council at the same time also, quoting, reiterated its demand that Israel immediately and completely cease all settlement activity, unquote, and called upon all states to differentiate between Israel and the occupied territories. I should say that on the day after the Security Council adopted this resolution in December 2016, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the resolution as, and I'm quoting, distorted, delusional, absurd, and part of the swan song of the old world. The second point I want to make on the settlements is to answer the question, why do we have this absolute prohibition in international law? It was because the framers of the 1949 Geneva Conventions wanted to codify into law the bitter lessons from the prior century, that annexation, settler implantation, and civilian settlements are the causes of war, wars of conquest, and immense human suffering. Settler implantation in particular was and is, for many colonial or occupying powers, the way to establish and grow a loyal civilian population, usually from the home country, that can make its rule over the acquired territory easier, to ensure domination of one group over another, and to create the basis for a lasting claim of sovereignty. So when we look at the history of settlement implantation projects, we see the kinds of examples that were in the minds of the drafters of the Geneva Conventions, as well as what is going on today. Historical examples would include the British settlement of Protestants in Catholic Ireland, the French in Algeria, the white South Africans and Germans in Namibia, the importation of Russians into the Baltic republics, and more recently, Moroccan settlers in Western Sahara, and the settlement of Han Chinese in Tibet and Xinjiang provinces in Western China. All of these tragedies are encapsulated in what I would call Israel's occu-annexation, which is a new word for the English language. Israel's settlements began in the summer of 1967, within a few months of the June 1967 war, and they're intended by the British leadership, the Israeli leadership then and now to create facts on the ground, to establish a sovereign claim over some or all of the occupied Arab territories. No occupying power that is busy creating civilian settlements can be serious about ending its occupation or respecting the human rights of the indigenous people under occupation. My third and final point about the settlements is that they are the engine of the Israeli occupation, and great suffering is intertwined with them. If it wasn't for the settlements, the Israeli occupation would have no reason for continuing. Here are some quick facts about them. Almost 10% of the Israeli Jewish population now lives in the settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. This creates a huge pro-settlement and pro-annexation voting bloc in Israel, which is exactly what the Israeli leaders who advocated for the settlements intended. In the Israeli Knesset today, there are only 2 parties representing 18 seats out of 120 seats that are opposed to the settlements. The settlements, as well, are the most expensive and the grandest national project in the 72-year history of Israel. The settlements are heavily subsidized by the Israeli government in the form of lower mortgage rates, cheap housing, tax incentives, highways devoted only to Jewish settlers, and plenty of security. And as a result of these incentives, the growth of the Israeli settlement population has been, for many years, much higher than the growth of the Israeli Jewish population behind the 1949 lines. Let me now just briefly turn to the question of annexation and 2 quick points. First, it should be clear, annexation and territorial conquest are regarded as intolerable scourges from darker times. The Charter of the United Nations, adopted in 1945, requires UN members to settle their differences by peaceful means, with the corollary that annexation has become illegal. The UN Security Council, beginning with its famous Resolution 242 in 1967, has expressly affirmed the principle that the acquisition of territory by war or force is inadmissible on at least 8 occasions. And as an aside, the first appearance of this phrase, the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war or force, in the aftermath of the June 1967 war in the Middle East, it was the British ambassador to the UN at the time, Lord Caradon, who is the older brother of Michael Foot, who was the primary drafter of Resolution 242. And second, just let me briefly compare the situation in Israel-Palestine with another recent annexation. I'm putting to you that there's a startling disparity in the way in which the international community reacted to the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its approach to the 2 annexations undertaken by Israel 40 years ago and its continued defiance today. Within weeks of the Russian invasion and annexation, and within the UN Security Council, with the UN Security Council unable to act because of the Russian veto, nevertheless, many of the most powerful players in the world enacted swift and comprehensive sanctions against Russia. They included the diplomatic downgrading of relations, including banishing Russia from the G8 and suspending its application to join the OECD, the freezing of assets and the imposition of travel restrictions against targeted individuals, import and export bans respecting goods coming from Crimea and Sevastopol, an array of economic sanctions against Russia, and restrictions on economic cooperation. They were imposed on Russia, notwithstanding that it is a significant international player politically and economically, that it has a population of 145 million people, and that Europe absorbed significant economic costs for taking these steps. Yet Israel, which is also illegally annexed territory, and which has faced censor on numerous points, as Amos Shocklin, the publisher of Haaretz, the Israeli Daily, wrote in 2016, with respect to the potential of serious measures coming from the international community, and I'm quoting, "The Israeli leadership will object and protest, but it may be that international pressure is precisely the force that will drive them to do the right thing." In conclusion, let me say that Israel learned an invaluable lesson 40 years ago when the international community condemned it for annexing East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, but was unwilling to impose political, diplomatic, or economic costs on Israel for doing so. It is highly doubtful that we'd be here today speaking about Israel's looming annexation of significant parts of the West Bank if the world had drawn real lines in the sand 40 years ago, or 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. As the old saying goes, the best time to plant an oak tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. If Israel carries through with Netanyahu's promise, then the chances for a genuine peace between Israel and Palestine in the foreseeable future will have gone, in my view, from implausible to unimaginable. Thank you very much.